Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the second debate of Easter 2023. The last time we debated an issue related to the Israel-Palestine conflict was in 2015, 8 years ago. I know everyone will treat this issue with the gravity it deserves, and in doing so will respect one another in this chamber. Before I introduce the motion, please note you can intervene during any of the speeches by standing up and saying point of information or on that point. However, you may only do so if the speaker accepts. If you want to make a full speech, you have the chance to during the intervals of our paper speakers. Finally, cries such as "hear, hear" are permitted. Moving on to the motion for tonight. The motion before the House is this House would pressurize Israel to exchange land for peace. Opening the debate tonight, we have Professor Avi Shlaim. Professor Avi Shlaim is an emeritus professor of international relations at the University of Oxford and a fellow of the British Academy. His books include Collision Across the Jordan, King Abdullah, the Zionist Movement, and the Partition of Palestine, The Iron War, Israel and Arab World, Line of Jordan, The Life of King Hussein, War and Peace, and Three Worlds, Memoir of an Arab Jew. Professor Avi Shlaim, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've just been informed that the original motion has been changed, and the revised motion is this House would pressurize Israel to exchange land for peace. And had I known that this is the motion, I would have spoken against it, because I don't believe in land for peace. Israel has had 55 years to trade land for peace and hasn't done so. So I support a democratic solution, one democratic state with equal rights for all its citizens, regardless of religion and ethnicity, between the Jordan River and the sea. But I will speak to the original motion, which made much more sense. It was this House believes that the West should put greater pressure on Israel to end its occupation. Israel's presence in the Palestinian territories is the most prolonged and brutal military occupation of modern times. This is why I volunteered to speak in favor of this motion. But I still had a problem with that motion because it says the West should put greater pressure on Israel. But this implies that the West has been putting pressure on Israel, which is manifestly not the case. The record of the West is one of craven and cowardly complicity and collusion in the Israeli occupation. And without really serious Western and international pressure on Israel, the occupation will never end. By the West, I mean the United States, European Union, and Britain. Israel boasts that it is an island of democracy in a sea of authoritarianism. And because the West has perceived Israel as a democratic state, Israel has received a huge amount of Western sympathy and support since its establishment. Whether Israel was a democracy before 1967 is debatable. Israel defines itself as both Jewish and democratic. This is an oxymoron, not to be confused with an oxymoron. You can't be both. Israel is either a racist Jewish state or it's a democratic state for all its citizens. Equality is an essential characteristic of democracy.
Point of information.
Okay?
Is it possible to be both Catholic and democratic state? Is it possible to be both a Muslim and democratic state?
Yes. Yes to both.
But not a Jewish democratic state. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. I'm saying that if there is a conflict between being a Jewish state and a democratic state, Israel has to make the choice. And since 1967, it has failed to make the choice. But if the Israeli public was pushed to make a choice, the great majority, 64%, would rather Israel be a Jewish state than a democratic state. The occupation is profoundly incompatible with any notion of democracy. So the situation between the river and the sea today is one of ethnocracy, of one ethnic group dominating the other. There is another word for this, and that is apartheid. Israel is an apartheid state.
The fact of the matter is that the Palestinians have an autonomy in the West Bank. And they're supposed to have self-governance. Mahmoud Abbas has now entered the 18th year of his 4-year term of office. That is where democratic values should be being pursued, and that surely is what the proposition should be calling for.
Last year, B'Tselem, the highly respected Israeli human rights organization, issued a report which answers your question. The title of the report is, quote, "A regime of Jewish supremacy from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. This is apartheid," unquote. The title says it all. In the last 2 years, 4 major human rights organizations have issued detailed reports, all concluding that Israel is an apartheid state. Moreover, Israel is the only member of the United Nations that I know which is officially racist. I'm talking here about the July 2018 Basic Law, the nation-state law, which says the Jews have a unique right to self-determination in Israel. In other words, Arabs and Muslims do not have a right to self-determination. So this basic law, it's not an ordinary piece of legislation, but a basic law creates 2 categories of citizens. Jews are the top category, and Arabs are second-class citizens. This is the reality. This is the reality that the West refuses to face. Western policy calls for direct negotiations between the parties, leading to a 2-state solution. But the asymmetry of power between Israel and the Palestinians is so great that a voluntary agreement between them is not possible. Israel is too strong, the Palestinians are too weak. A third party is needed to redress the balance. That party has to be the United States. But since 1967, the United States has arrogated to itself a monopoly over the diplomacy of the Israel-Palestine conflict. It arrogated to itself a monopoly, but it has failed to push Israel into a settlement. The United States presents itself as an honest broker, but because of its extreme partiality towards Israel, it's a dishonest broker. It's not an honest broker, but it acts like Israel's lawyer. The asymmetry of power is so great that America needed to throw its weight to the Palestinian side of the scales in order to redress the balance. Instead, America throws all its weight behind Israel and thereby accentuates the asymmetry of power, which is the basic problem. America gives Israel money, arms, and advice to move forward towards a settlement with the Palestinians. Israel takes the money, takes the arms, and rejects and ignores the advice. America has a veto in the Security Council. Over the last 3 decades, America has used the veto dozens of times to defeat resolutions that are not to Israel's liking. The trouble with American support for policy, the trouble with American support for Israel is that it is unconditional. This means that Israel can do whatever it likes. This enables Israel to continue with the occupation, to continue to defy UN resolution, to continue to violate international law. Because of the unconditional nature of the American support for Israel, Israel gets away literally with murder. Now let me turn to European Union. European Union is the biggest donor to the Palestinian Authority, but it has very little political influence. It is a payer, but not a player. EU continues to spout the cliches of a two-state solution, but it has done nothing to pressurize Israel into ending the occupation and making a two-state solution possible. Then there is Britain. Britain has a long and undistinguished record of betraying the Palestinian people, going back to the Balfour Declaration of 1917. The last 5 Tory prime ministers have all been ardent and uncritical, blind supporters of Israel. Britain advocates direct negotiations between the parties leading to a two-state solution. But the fact is that Israel refuses to negotiate, and the fact is that Britain calls for a two-state solution, but it only recognizes one state, Israel. It doesn't recognize Palestine. Last month, the British government issued a policy paper titled 2030 Roadmap to Bilateral UK-Israel Relations. This long document covers trade and cooperation in a large number of spheres. But, and this is the unusual thing for a trade agreement, under the terms of this agreement, the British government opposes the referral of the Palestine-Israel conflict to the International Criminal Court. And Britain objects to BDS, to boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And thirdly, Britain pledges to work to reduce scrutiny of Israel at the UN. Some Western pressure on Israel. Not only is Britain not putting any pressure on Israel, on the contrary, it goes much further in obstructing international organizations and the ICC from holding Israel to account for its crimes. To conclude, Israel is an apartheid state. Israel flagrantly violates international law and international humanitarian law. Israel ignores UN resolutions. It continues to occupy Palestinian land and to oppress the Palestinian people. So the question here is, should the West put greater pressure on Israel? Well, it's about time it started to put pressure on Israel. A reporter once asked Mahatma Gandhi, after a major massacre, what do you think of Western civilization? And Gandhi replied, that would be a good idea. And if you ask me, what do you think of Western pressure on Israel, I think that would be a good idea. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.